Well, it's been absolutely incredible to get you on finally after all these months. And I think what's so interesting about your story is how, over the past couple of years, you set up this amazing company, the British Adventure Collective. And from that, you've been doing these incredible trips. For people who don't know you, probably the best place to start, I always like, is at the beginning and about how you fell in love with this sort of adventurous life and these adventures.
Yeah, so I was actually pretty fortunate to grow up in the Lake District in the northwest of England. So to be honest, there wasn't a great deal of other options other than to get into adventures. There's not a great deal going on in Cumbria other than lots of mountains, plenty of lakes. So I was really lucky because I was raised in the hills and sort of running and fell walking and mountain biking from a young age, and then sort of started to gain more independence on my adventures, I suppose, from there in my teen years. And yeah, it's just gone. Projects have just got bigger and bigger, and looking a bit more international over recent years as well, which has been fun. And now, now I live in Chamonix, which is a pretty great place to be based for adventure. No shortage of mountains; they're a little bit bigger than the Lake District.
Yeah. Well, that was the thing, is like you used to be based in London and then you set up shop in Chamonix. What was the sort of first adventure, like big adventure, which sort of struck a nerve and made you sort of go, right, I want to sort of take this a bit
good
further?
Question. So, I actually came to Chamonix for the Haute Route back in, I guess, 4 years ago. So for those who don't know, the Haute Route is a sort of a classic traverse from Chamonix to Zermatt. It's usually done over sort of 6 days or 7 days. It's 125 kilometers with 8,000 meters ascent. So I did it in the usual format with some friends, and it was my first proper ski tour experience, and absolutely fell in love with it. And Chamonix obviously is an iconic town with a huge reputation, but it's just the amount of landscape and terrain here is just infinite. You could probably spend an entire life exploring this region and still not complete it, sort of thing. So I kind of fell in love with it from there, and then managed to come back out last winter. And although ski lifts were of course closed, managed to do a lot of ski touring and got reasonably fit during that winter with no other choice other than getting the skins on. Really.
It was sort of that trip and the sort of planning that goes into one of these trips. How does the idea from concept to reality sort of come about with that?
It's a trip I had in mind from the whole of last winter, sort of, I guess, a bit of a pipe dream idea. And then as I got, fitter throughout the winter, it sort of became a little bit more like a potentially realistic thing to try. I recce'd the route a little bit beforehand and checked to see, that I was confident on the route. And as built my days to get bigger and bigger, decided to try in one big push. There's actually a British ski mountaineer and photographer called Ben Tibbets, who I'd seen had done the route originally. And then I decided to have a go at the Verbier variant of the route, which is the most popular one, which, as far as I knew, no one had ever done in one push before in one day. So, it came to springtime, and then it was time to give it a go. I got all my equipment sort of refined over the winter. And I hadn't really done a day bigger than 3,000 meters ascent. So it was potentially a bit of a bold undertaking, but with enough food and a bit of grit, decided just to go for it, and it all panned out okay in the end.
So usually it's usually done over 7 days. You decided to do it in 24 hours.
Yeah, that's right. So there's just I don't really know what it was about the trip, because I'm not really necessarily an endurance athlete per se, and I certainly am not a ski mountaineer in terms of wearing lycra and skiing on super lightweight skis. So it was a bit of an oddball project in a sense, but I kind of just got excited about the prospect of just setting off with me, on my own solo trip with my skis from Chamonix, and kind of like the idea that there was sort of no sleep before I reached Zermatt, whenever that was going to be. So actually it ended up taking about 30 hours in the end, which was, it was just a big adventure. And the main goal, I guess, to make sure I was safe and could do it was to get there before the second night. So I set off in the early hours of the morning at 8 a.m., skied through the day. As you said, went via Glacier de Tour, went down to Champay, and then cycled to Verbier, and then from Verbier went to a roller, and then over to Zermatt. And yeah, I got there sort of in the afternoon the following day, and it was just a big old adventure. I mean, it was painful, it was tough, but actually I just loved it. It didn't feel like there was no point where I said I didn't want to be here or I wasn't enjoying it, which is surprising.
Yeah, because that's the interesting thing is the bit from Chamonix to Verbier, because I was meant to be doing the Patrol de Glacier, which is reverse route from Zermatt to Verbier. But from Verbier to Chamonix, you have to go down the mountain and then back up, don't you? In terms of, and in the spring, there's no snow. So you were cycling once you had got down up the windy roads of Verbier to, and then at the sort of Medran lift at 1500, then skinned up to.
That's right,
Montfort.
yeah. So I obviously
Or just before it, by Bec de Rosse and Montfort.
Connected Champagne and Verbier by bike because the snow coverage is rarely good enough. It's something most people just jump on a bus and then grab the lift, but obviously I wanted to do it human powered. So the cycle actually provided a really nice intermission from all of the ski touring. It felt quite different, different muscle groups, change of scenery. And although, as you say, it was a big old grind up to Verbier, it did feel kind of different and quite enjoyable. But then, back on skis from Verbier onwards and skinned out through the resort. And then, on towards, between Bec de Rosse and Montfort, I think, the col there. And it just started getting dark. It was sort of, I think it was a reasonable moon. And with the Bec de Rosse kind of looming over you, and as darkness fell, it was pretty epic scenery just to be scooting along by myself. And the sunset we'd had in Verbier, and you'll remember you spent time in Verbier, you always just get the most magic sunsets. It was pretty epic.
Yeah, it's an incredible sort of south-facing resort, which looks way down the valley. And yeah, you do get these sort of epic sunsets that happen there, and even sunrises. And sort of what was the sort of feeling like sort of skinning on your own in the middle of the night from Verbier towards Zermatt with no one around?
Yeah, it's I think quite a special feeling. Obviously a lot of people ask, are you worried or scared? And to be honest, I was quite calm. It's so quiet, and it was a very pure experience. And when you're by yourself in such an extreme environment, everything feels very heightened. Everything's more extreme. So small things they feel like so much more to you. I kind of thrive on that independence when there's no one else there but yourself to look after yourself. So you just kind of have to take it easy and manage, any hesitations or fears you may have. And the scenery was just unreal. And thankfully, it was a good night. Obviously, I didn't do it in a bad weather day. It was a nice evening, and there was potentially going to be some light snow showers, and nothing came in, so it was great. But just following the path, making sure I was navigating the right way as I get progressively more tired was obviously key. But I just thrived in the situation, to be honest.
Were you studying maps beforehand, or had you sort of not walked the route, but like studied it quite hard to know where not to go off the path? Because it's, for people listening, it's backcountry, so it already been sort of skinned out in a sense. Not skinned out, that's probably the wrong word to use, but tracks laid.
There was a skin track to follow. Yeah, exactly. So I had studied the route in quite a lot of detail, and I'd actually done, because I'd never previously done the Verbier section. So 2 weeks prior, a friend and I went to do a bit of a recce and get used to the route. So over 2 days, we took our time and kind of got to know it in the day. And obviously, if you can visualize it in the day, it's easier to understand and navigate at night when you can see so much less. So I mean, it's all glacial terrain, so you certainly don't want to take too much of a wrong turn. Plenty of crevasses you don't want to fall into. So.
Yeah, especially like for someone who's, as you say, probably listening, would sort of be more sort of fearful towards avalanches because you're going off piste. But in terms of the route that's sort of laid out, would you say that it was relatively safe and well trodden?
Yeah, I would say that. Yeah, there is one deviation I took, which was to kind of cut a section off. It was a little bit quicker. which involved skiing sort of a 40-degree kind of mini couloir. That was a little bit spicy, I suppose. And it had some quite big ice chunks on it, sort of avalanche debris. So that at night was a little bit more committing than most of the route, but you wouldn't have had to go on that. So if people are interested in looking at the route, it's pretty mellow on the whole. It's not too extreme. It's just obviously making sure that you're going the right way at the right time. And in terms of avalanche risk, the funny thing about night and as well the speed in which you can traverse, it's actually far better at night because, of course, everything's firm, everything's hard, the temperatures are cool, the snow's not getting any hotter. So actually, although I couldn't see further than 20, 30, 40 meters in front of me, and the navigation was difficult, the snow safety was actually probably a lot greater. And there's a large section on the Verbier route which relies on a really good traverse. You need to hold as much height as you can. And that in spring conditions in the afternoon can be really tough because it's all soft and you're falling in, all the rest of it. Whereas actually at night, I was flying along, on this rock solid sort of icy snow. So it actually had benefits in some ways.
Amazing. And that's the thing is, I suppose being out in the sort of backcountry of the mountains at night, all alone, it's just your senses just must have been so heightened and just this most incredible feeling. Was this your first big trip doing so? In terms of,
certainly first. Go on, sorry.
You're basically your first big adventure into more extreme stuff.
Yeah, I think it was my first sort of full nighttime alpine adventure, I suppose, which is quite a big committing, decision to keep skiing all the way through the night, no matter what happens. So yeah, it was pretty intense. Yeah, it was a great feeling. But as you say, you just feel everything. You feel the sound of the snow, the way that the moonlight is glancing on the crystals of the snow. Everything just feels heightened. I actually listened to some music for sections as well, which just puts you in quite a nice frame of mind. And then, when the sun started to come up eventually, the other end, it was a pretty tough couple of hours between 3 and 5 in the morning. And then when the sun does come back, it's just this whole new lease of life, this whole new energy that, promotes you forward.
And what was the feeling like getting into Zermatt and the sort of feeling of finishing in just over 24 hours, 30 hours? A route that usually takes 7 days.
It was quite surreal, the feeling. It was almost anticlimactic, if I'm honest. It was like, I spent a winter or longer thinking about this thing that I didn't know was possible. And then when I reached there, it was almost like, oh, it's done. I suppose people have that feeling sometimes when they do something that they weren't sure they were going to be able to do. But yeah, it felt quite surreal. And I actually, if I'm completely honest, I think I might have had more in the tank. I wasn't completely done, which is interesting. It does open my eyes to the prospects of, can I go further? Can we do something bigger in one big day?
That's always a very dangerous dangerous psyche. I when you get that feeling of like you've sort of completed something which you never thought was possible, and then you're like, oh, I can do more, and then you try and start pushing it, and then after that, did you feel that you were sort of hooked on this and wanted to actually explore it further, see how far you could go?
Yeah, it's something that's been on my mind, particularly now this winter, being out in Chamonix, is like whether I can push a little bit more and do a bigger day out. So the equipment I used, because I kind of wanted to enjoy the skiing and the day, I actually wore very ordinary clothes. I didn't wear any lycra. I didn't have skimo skis. They were kind of ordinary touring skis. So I do wonder if I went full skimo at the cost of my credibility in adventure, I wonder how far we could go. But there's an ultra royal traverse of Mont Blanc, which is potentially a next one to try. It's another huge day, just doing the entirety of the Massif. Again, it's another Ben Tibbetts project, actually. He's a good inspiration. He lives just down the road, which was always useful. But.
Yeah, I suppose it's probably sort of similar to, we had Mark Beaumont on, who cycled around the world in like 2006 or something. And he did it in 97 days or something. And he had panniers and everything and went around the world, had an amazing time. And then afterwards, people started breaking that record. And then he went back about 15 years later and got it down to under 80 days. You know, when you cut out everything, you cut this, cut that, suddenly, and just laser eye focused on time, just to see how far you could possibly push it. And that's something probably you
exciting.
Yeah, probably want to sort of explore further with it. Is actually how far can you go from Chamonix to Zermatt?
Yeah, I mean, it's something I'm definitely keen to look at doing an extension route and see if there's a bigger day that can be done. There's something about one giant day that really appeals. It's just this huge adventure where you're all in. It's like this hyper focus. Nothing else matters for that day. And then obviously after the day, it's all done and dusted and you can continue with whatever your normal life looks like. But there's something about that sort of, I don't know, it's such a grand adventure in the shortest term that quite appeals. So yeah, watch this space. Maybe I'll see if we can go further, go faster.
Oh, there you go. And from that, though, you then started doing more and more of these sort of much bigger adventures, because beforehand you were very much sort of adventuring in the Lake Districts, probably more weeks, weekends. And then that was your first big extreme trip, in a sense. The first time you really stepped outside your comfort zone massively and prepared for it. Still had more in the tank. So with that, were you like, okay, what could I do next?
Yeah, certainly. I think it certainly sort of made me reevaluate my perspective of what is attainable in terms of challenges. You know, as you say, when you think of something as just out of reach or a real big push, and then suddenly it's within your zone, then suddenly you look further. But yeah, I think a key focus for me will be to go on bigger trips in the future. As I say, I do enjoy short, sharp, big pushes, but there's, I think, a very different mental game to doing longer trips. So this summer, I'm undertaking a longer project, which will be a few months long, and obviously keeping that mindset, focus, and drive for 3 months is a very different psyche to required for 24 hours. Both have their challenges, but they're very different. You know?
Yeah, and because after that you did the 7-7 or the Alpine 7. Is that right?
Yeah.
And
that's right. Yeah, it was actually before the Alpine 7. But.
And was the idea of sort of cycling to each thing and then climbing, or was it just about the climbing?
This time it was just about the climbing. We wanted to try and attempt these 7 Alpine countries high points in 1 week. So it was, I guess it's similar. It's, high impact, intense rush around, Central Europe. But yeah, so we started off in Slovenia and Triglav, and then we went through to Austria, Germany, Liechtenstein, Switzerland, and Mont Blanc. It was a cool trip. Yeah, I mean, it was with a friend, and it was quite ad hoc, to be completely honest. It wasn't entirely well thought out, which sometimes the best adventures are. You're just going with the flow and seeing how it goes. But unfortunately, we didn't quite get the perfect weather for Monte Rosa, so Spitzer. So we only got to the refuge and had to turn back thereafter. But we did the other 5 peaks of 6 countries. So yeah, it was a hell of an adventure.
It was more about sort of trying to experience them all than sort of break any sort of record.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we wanted it to be like a fast-paced, high-energy trip. But the thing that ended up being quite refreshing was just the diversity of landscapes. And you see the Alps as a uniform one thing, but the difference between the Julian Alps in Slovenia and the Alps in Chamonix is huge, both culturally and landscape and people. And just to experience in such a short time the diversity of all of those changing along the way was a really cool feeling.
Yeah, that was sort of the interesting thing when we went around. We went from like Switzerland, France, Italy, and then into Slovenia. And as you said, Triglav was like, for us, was just like the most spectacular mountains, like really dramatic. Whereas other Alpine, maybe Swiss Alps, where I was, less dramatic, but like these were sort of like, I don't know, 2,000, 1,500, like sheer cliff faces out of nowhere, just going down.
Yeah.
It was just like mind blowing, because I suppose, as you say, sometimes these ad hoc adventures where you're not really that prepared of what you're going to see or what you're going to do, they make for some of the most memorable and most exciting trips possible.
Definitely. I think as well, there's a temptation in the Alps to focus on the larger peaks, which usually are in Switzerland, France, or sometimes Italy. So all the 4,000ers are really in those countries. Whereas to go across to, as you say, Slovenia, to the Julian Alps or Liechtenstein, for example, I think if it wasn't for this, idea, this reason we had to go to Liechtenstein, I would never have gone near these peaks. But they were totally remote, quite wild, actually. The most challenging of all of them was in Liechtenstein, peculiarly, which was not the highest. I think it was the lowest, in fact. But yeah, so just to have an angle or a reason to tie this sort of trip all in together, it just worked really well to experience and explore areas that we might not have gone to otherwise.
I think sometimes with those sort of trips, even if you're just doing it as a sort of thing, it gives you that opportunity just to explore, as you say, these countries which you otherwise wouldn't, to sort of try and tie them in. Because, as you say, Liechtenstein, which you said you probably would never have gone, by tying the sort of 7 biggest peaks in the 7 Alpine mountains, by doing that, you get to visit these places you otherwise wouldn't.
Yeah, for sure. And I think I quite often resist the temptation to sort of bucket list or to box check. But in fact, I think there can be some really positives of it, so long as you don't let it completely rule your focus, and so maybe you're not missing out on adventures along the way. But sometimes, it takes you to places you wouldn't otherwise have thought about. And I think people can be quite quick to negatively judge on people who are just ticking off, be it Wainwrights or Munros or whatever. But actually, I think having a focus to just keep you going back to these places and exploring can be really positive for people.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think there's 2 different ways of box ticking in a sense. It gives you opportunities to go to places which you otherwise wouldn't have ever planned on going. And sometimes when you incorporate them into these adventures, as I just said, it sort of gives you that chance to visit Liechtenstein or Slovenia, because this sort of idea, or this going for the big mountains, you otherwise would never really go there. There wouldn't be any reason. But those places are almost more dramatic. Well, not more dramatic, but in a sense, they're more. There's so much more to them than meets the eye.
I think in your expectation as well, if it's lower or you don't know much about a place, you can really be taken back when you don't, you go there and actually you're surprised by how amazing a place is, or it's more scenery than you thought, whatever it could be. Your expectation defines how you're going to feel about it. And if you go to these big name mountains that everyone knows, like Mont Blanc, you will have an amazing time for sure, but you'll be expecting to have an amazing time. So it maybe doesn't have that same impact that some of those lesser known peaks can.
Yeah, it's the idea of, if you go there with no expectation, you're never disappointed.
Yeah, exactly.
Which I always think is quite a good one. And from all this, you've set up the British Adventure Collective. For people listening, what's that about?
Yeah, so we set up the collective basically to promote adventures within the UK primarily. To sort of encourage people and I guess, inform people that there are some unbelievable wild spaces in the UK that a lot of people don't realise. It was born on a bikepacking trip to the Highlands with a few friends. We just jumped on a train, again, very ad hoc. We were ill prepared. We didn't know what we were doing. We just had the best time, probably the best trip. So that was kind of like a awakening almost of, how truly spectacular some of the UK can be. And yeah, there was a group of friends who decided to come together to sort of share our adventures and imagery to inspire people to make the most of it. And that's kind of now evolved to being a little bit more international as well. So, we do trips abroad and also produce media for brands as a business aspect. And we also offer experiences for those wanting to try activities and stuff in the lakes. So yeah, plenty going on there.
Oh, amazing. Because also within it, you've got Emily Scott, who we had on the podcast in the very early stages about a year ago. She's sort of involved in it, or is she taking a bit more of a backseat now?
Yeah, she is. She's currently ski instructing in Zermatt, so she's not got much free time to be doing lots of stuff. But she did an amazing Munro project, completely self-propelled, completely self-supported for 3-4 months. And Emily and I have done loads of adventures together, and we'll continue to. She's one of my best adventure buddies. She's always reliable and up for anything.
Yeah, she's great. We had her on episode 9 for anyone who wants to sort of check that out. But going back, I suppose for you, you're now based in Chamonix and probably looking at more and more of these adventures. What's the sort of future hold for the British Adventure Collective and yourself?
Yeah, it's a funny one. We've been going through a discussion of whether the British Adventure Collective can do Alpine adventures or whether it matters, whether it's the fact that we are Brits or whether the adventures need to be in the UK. But I think we're quite comfortable with the fact that there's lots of Alpine adventures, and Chamonix actually has a very long standing history with British tourism from back in the 1920s all the way through. So it's been the Brits have actually had a strong influence into how Chamonix is formed as a town. So I think it's still quite relevant to be the British Adventure Collective. But we've got quite a lot of UK adventures, so some big trail runs coming, some big kayak trips, and then I've got this big summer project which I will reveal more pretty soon. But it's going to involve basically traveling around lots more countries, lots more peaks, and using an electric vehicle to travel between. They're really exciting one.
Oh, that sounds amazing. And I suppose now, before the podcast started, we were sort of discussing about sort of travel and electric and everything. And I imagine with electric vehicles now, traveling around electric all over Europe probably shouldn't be a problem as it might have been 5 years ago. There's all sorts of... what's the word? What is the word? Completely forgotten.
Infrastructure?
Infrastructure, that's the word. Get there eventually. So there's all sorts of infrastructure for it, and it actually should be a lot easier. As I said, we were planning on doing hopefully still am, a project looking at biodiesel, and it's the sort of difference between diesel, petrol, hydrogen, and electric for the sort of future, which would be nice. And hold on, let me just check because we only have an hour on this thing. I'm getting slightly conscious of time. Where are we? It doesn't. Where is it? 32 minutes. Okay, we've got a bit more time. Cool. Is there any? We've had Alpine 7. Oh, and another thing which you did in the last year or so was your big cycle from the Scilly Isles back down to Land's End. What was the sort of purpose behind undertaking this trip?
So it's actually from Scilly Isles all the way to the Shetlands. So it's sort of Land's End to Johnny Groats extended.
Sorry, my geography there is just fucking ridiculous. Okay, I'll start that again.
Go again. It's funny. Go on, sorry. Again.
I don't know why. Like I was going to go to the Scilly Isles this summer, and Anyway, when I said that, I was like, Scilly Isles, Lantern. I was like, no, that doesn't make sense. And then you're like, right, no, that's completely wrong.
Well, I did pass through. It was a bit further.
That is true, but that would have been quite a short trip.
It would, yeah.
But another one of your big trips was cycling from the Scilly Isles up to John O'Groats. And what was the reason for undertaking this trip this last summer?
Yeah, so it was sort of born out of a lockdown daydream, if you like. I'd always wanted to do Land's End to John O'Groats in some form. To cycle the length of the UK feels like a bit of a rite of passage for any British adventurer. But it just felt to me like to rush that journey just seemed like a waste. And putting all those miles on the bike and going a fairly direct route, I think would have missed quite a lot of the best bits of the UK. So sort of extended it a little bit. So went from Scilly Isles all the way to the Shetlands, and then did a very indirect route, which ended up being, I think, just shy of 3,000 kilometers in the end. So it basically, came through all the best bits that I felt like I wanted to visit. So sort of up and down the Southwest Peninsula, I went fully into Wales to Brecon. And then actually the first time, so after I'd got the go ahead from, Freedom had returned and I jumped on the bike and went for it, I actually had a big bike crash doing an activity and severed my colon, which is my first hospital trip to date. It did it in style. It wasn't a great day. So I had to then, call the trip, and I had surgery and basically revisited it the following year to finish the job.
And what was some of the moments on that trip, having gone back a year later? What were some of the moments that really stuck out for you?
Yeah, so when we resumed the trip, it was, I don't know if anyone remembers, but last May, we just had this horrible rain, freezing cold. It was really uncharacteristically cold, and it was constant rain for about 2 weeks. So that was the starting the trip again, which is nice. The first week was just getting hammered with rain, but that was character building. It's fine. You do a trip in the UK, you're going to get rained on, right? That's part of it. But then when I actually hit the Lake District, it was like, everything cleared. And God, I was so grateful, having had so much rain for so long. We just got amazing weather from then on, really. The rest of the trip, all through the lakes up into Scotland, was just stand out. So it was pretty spectacular. And I mean, there was loads of different parts of the trip which were, enjoyable, of course. But as soon as you hit the Highlands in the sun, there's just nowhere else like it. It was amazing. Cycling through some of those sort of quieter roads and some of the gravel tracks in the Northwest Highlands with, surrounded by big peaks. We went up and climbed Sullivan as well, and had a sort of camp on the top, and you're looking out and you can just see countless lakes at every direction, and you're a stone's throw from the sea. So it's a pretty spectacular place.
Oh, wow. Yeah, going back, I do remember the May because Emily, Scott, and myself were paddleboarding in April, and bizarrely, like, the winter had been pretty awful. And for that 1 week, we had like really good weather. We had like 6 days of sunshine, frost, but sunshine. And then 1 day of pure rain. And then about a month later, quite a lot of people were like cycling and doing all sorts of stuff. There's a couple of adventurers and explorers that were doing stuff around the UK. And I was just watching them, on yourself included, just get absolutely hammered by the rain. And like there were just pictures of people just like on their bikes, just like, this is hell. This is just miserable.
It does sort of grate on you eventually. You just keep getting that rain again. 1 day or half a day, fine, but when it just comes again and again, it's pretty challenging. But I almost got used to it after the week, actually. It just became the new norm.
Yeah. And sort of being, for people listening, like being up in the Highlands, looking out on a sort of sunset, how could you describe it to them? The sort of feelings that you get when you just look out over the horizon with all these incredible lakes and that sort of feeling.
It's almost the feeling of space, like you rarely experience. It's just such an expansive area. And as a photographer, it's interesting when you always try and do these places justice. It's particularly challenging to shoot it. You have this obviously lack of detail if you shoot on a wide angle lens because it's just so big, everything looks too small. But when you're there, it just feels like it just goes on and on. And it was more akin to something you'd witness in the fjords of Norway or what it feels semi-Arctic up there. It's a really special feeling. But it's probably worth me mentioning this project was actually for a film. So essentially to showcase, the amazing activities you can do within the UK in one big bikepacking trip. So it's called The Great Escape. If anyone's interested to see it, it'll do it far more justice than my words ever could do.
And where can people watch this?
Yeah, it's on Vimeo and YouTube. So if you just search for British Adventure Collective, The Great Escape, it'll come up. And yeah, I mean, we had a few friends of mine following the film crew, and they are unbelievable cinematographers. So to really try and portray how incredible this area was, it was great to not have to be shooting it all myself, but instead kind of focusing on the activities and the ride and the experience.
Wow, incredible. Yeah, I think, we'll leave a description a link to your website in the description below so people can check it out at thebritishadventurecollective.com. There's a part of the show where we ask the same 5 questions to each guest each week, with the first being on your sort of trips and expeditions, what's the one gadget that you always take with you?
Yeah, I actually always use my phone, controversial. I know obviously a lot of wanting to go on adventures is about disconnecting, and I do try and reduce any screen time. But I have to say I used FatMap on my phone a lot for any route planning. If you're in complex terrain, it's just such a brilliant tool to be able to navigate. You've got loads of overlays so you can see the gradient, you can see the aspect. It's just such a useful bit of kit that I wouldn't go anywhere without it. And then I can have maps for everywhere I'm going without having to carry a physical map. So
that's very true.
Charged phone.
Do you take a little battery pack as well?
You do, yeah. You've got to, and obviously there's an element of reliance on technology here. So people probably be a little bit careful if you're going into, tough conditions or you're going to get rained on heavy. Then make sure your phone's well protected and the battery life's good because you don't want to be left without it otherwise.
Yeah, I tried using like solar panels to charge my phone sometimes, and they usually only work in like really, really hot conditions. And then if it's so hot, then it overheats the phone and the battery, so it's sort of almost counterproductive.
Yeah.
What is your favorite?
Whether it actually works, but
yeah, exactly. What is your favorite adventure or travel book?
I think Chris Bonington's Ascent. It's essentially his biography covering a huge range of his career, which is obviously massively extensive. But there's just a real kind of raw grit to that era of mountaineering, and the things that they used to climb is just incredible. And I just love how poor their equipment was back then and how bold they were. They were just pushing the boundaries in a way that I'm not sure many modern athletes do. And there's something just really exciting about that era, which I think is hard to beat. And he's a great writer, of course.
Yeah. Oh, very nice. Why are these adventures important to you?
That's a good question. I honestly almost don't know, which is the worst answer ever. It's so deep rooted to who I am. I don't know how to live any other way. I know that sounds really cliche, but there's just something that within me that needs to be on an adventure of some kind all the time. And that doesn't have to be extreme or it doesn't have to be really physical or even that long, but just something with a sense of unknown and going somewhere that you haven't been before. That sense of exploration, be it local or global. It's just deep rooted. But yeah, couldn't quite define it.
Is there like a little motto that you live by when you're on these adventures?
Good question. Yeah, maybe. Oh well, in terms of the motto, do you know what one quote that I do like, actually really like? Have you? I presume you've seen 14 Peaks.
Yes.
Yeah, when he says, "I'm hesitant to swear," but he says, "When you think you're fucked, you're only 45% fucked." And I just think it's brilliant, and it's so true. There's so much more in the tank than I think people realize you're capable of, and every time you push that comfort zone, you push that envelope, or you push yourself physically, you just find there's more in there. So long as you can be well fed and have enough water, then there's just so much more in the tank than you think you've got.
Yeah, it's so true. Great documentary. Yeah, it's that's the one thing, as we were sort of alluding to earlier. When you think you're done, you can always just go that little bit further.
Yeah. Will you ever find the true limit? That's the question.
Exactly. What about your favorite quote?
Sorry, that was my favorite quote.
Oh, right. Yes, the little motto quote. Well, then people listening probably are always keen to sort of travel and go on these sort of big, grand adventures like yourself. What's the one thing that you would recommend to people wanting to get started?
Yeah, I think just you need to be first of all willing to push your comfort zones, and obviously that's relative to your experience. So there is no better way just to take the first step, So whatever that may be, maybe it's just sleeping outside for one night, and you'll do it wrong. You'll be cold one night. You won't have the right kit. You'll get wet, and that's just part of the learning experience. I think the key is just have the boldness to take that first step, the big move, because we've all started somewhere. I cycled across Scotland on that bikepacking trip on a full suspension mountain bike with a giant backpack. It was a brutal experience, but I learned, and without having the boldness just to try those things, then you'll never take the next step and learn. So yeah, just go for it.
Yeah, it's very true. I had talking of like Chamonix, where you are. I once cycled up there, came through a like torrential rain and a thunderstorm. All my stuff got wet, and then I was camping just about 5 miles outside, and all my stuff was soaked to the brim. Been up in the mountains, freezing cold. Had to like put on every layer I had in my bag, which was not very much, and then spent the entire night shivering away. And it is by sort of just doing stuff like that you learn. Like that was the last time I ever decided, I won't put it in like a water bag or anything and do it up.
Yeah. You only do that once and have a miserable night. You soon learn, don't you?
Yeah, you learn quite quickly. And finally, what are you doing now, and how can people follow your adventures in the future?
Yeah, so I've just got a collection of adventures planned for the year. So I'll be doing lots of stuff in the UK and then also out of Chamonix, and lots of ski touring and ski mountaineering. And if you want to find me, you can either go on Instagram, of course, British Adventure Collective, or Aaron Rolph. Give us a follow. I'll give you a follow back.
Amazing. Well, Aaron, it's been such a pleasure listening to your stories, and quite excited to find out what adventures are brewing this summer.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. It's been good to chat, and I'll be sharing more about that trip pretty soon, so you won't have to wait too long.